to medical school, we think that's too high. I mean, he was being somewhat facetious, of course, but these are the kinds of policies that our citizens here in the United States are calling for: tuition-free college, universal health care. So the Assad regime, the Assad government, excuse me, is in the business of doing this and providing this to the people. And without a doubt, even the nonviolent opposition parties who had issue with issues of democracy or corruption prior to 2011, everyone has thrown themselves in behind the Assad government, because that's the best hope, the best bet for the Syrian people. And so lastly, I think I want to echo what Henry said, that to a person, people asked that the sanctions be lifted, because those sanctions, while we were there, somebody came and said a certain pharmaceutical company, which name I forget at the moment, was refusing to send childhood immunizations from the United States to Syria, causing great harm to Syrian people. It's not how this country or any country should act within the world community. So the sanctions, as we've learned many times, do not hurt the governments they're intended to hurt. They hurt the people, and so they need to be lifted. We also heard that the border between Turkey and Syria needs to be closed so that this pipeline of trained groups, terror groups, is blocked and no more of those groups get into Syria. And finally, and this is where we come in as the United States, that the United States needs to stop supporting some of those outside terror groups. All the support for the outside terror groups needs to be withdrawn and allow the Syrians to fend for themselves. The Syrian Arab Army is fighting for its life and fighting for the life of Syria. And we need, as a country, to acknowledge our role, what we are doing to cause harm and destruction to the Syrian people, and we need to stop it, and we need to stop it now. And that's why one of the reasons, one of the things I'll be saying over and over again since my return from Syria. So.
My name is Donna Nassor. I have been a human rights and peace activist for as long as I can remember. As an American citizen, it is shameful for me to admit what my government is doing in the sovereign country of Syria. We have no right to impose these illegal sanctions. In fact, these sanctions, allegedly, the government says are against the government of Syria. But in fact, it's against the people, civil society, people who are attempting to maintain the infrastructure, the health care, the safety of all Syrian people. One of the things that stood out to me is not only the lack of medication and the fact that Syrian children are dying because they can't get chemotherapy meds into the country because of the illegal sanctions that the U.S. and the West has imposed. Also, they're not allowing parts and material to get to businesses who are trying to maintain. And they're trying to maintain for more than one reason, and not just to continue to make money, but to employ people. Because when people have no way to earn a living, they become desperate. And we know that some of the Syrian people who may have chosen to join the terrorists, mostly for economic reasons, because they couldn't earn a living. And after listening to him, after listening to all the voices of civil society and the groups and the government officials that we met with, if you think about it, it makes no sense what the U.S. media and Western media is reporting. It makes no sense that Assad, who is trying to maintain the infrastructure and look toward the future for the Syrian people, would be the one destroying hospitals and all of these places that the U.S. media and the Western media are claiming that he is the one responsible for destroying. It just doesn't make sense. He is interested in the future for Syria. He told us flat out, you know, when this is over with, we can have another election. If they don't want me, they don't want me. That's fine. But for now, I've been elected to lead this country, and that is what I will do.
The U.S. hostility to independent Syria long precedes 2011, the beginning of the war. The U.S., I concluded, claims to be against ISIS terrorism, but yet it's been loath to fight a really consistent fight against terrorism. Certain privileged groups, such as the al-Nusra Front, the names shift, are called moderate rebels because they fight the Syrian government, and the U.S. wants that. They are not moderate. They beheaded a 12-year-old boy when we were there. We saw it on YouTube and on TV. The motives of the U.S. proxy war states are somewhat different. Sectarian motives and regional power rivalries affect Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The Wahhabist ideology, the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, is a sick, medieval, backward ideology. It drives the Saudi state. It motivates that state to finance this war. And Damascus, by contrast, promotes a socially inclusive and pluralistic form of Islam. And we met the leaders of that form of Islam, and they are humane and democratic-minded people and have every reason to join with the American people in stopping this insane support for Wahhabism, which is behind so much terrorism in the world. Those of my fellow countrymen who are dogmatic about Assad demonization are not going to like what I have to say now, which is that the Syrian government is popular, and for that reason, it is winning the war. The Battle of Aleppo will probably be decided soon, relatively soon, and maybe the last hurrah, in my opinion, of the foreign mercenaries. The president is popular. His government is recognized as legitimate by the UN. It contests and wins elections. The elections are monitored. There's a parliament which contains opposition parties. We met them. There is a significant nonviolent opposition which is trying to work constructively for its own social vision. Some of it is inside the government, which in effect is a government of national unity. Some of it is in the parliament. We met them. The Minister of Reconciliation, as I think some of us have said, deals directly with armed groups, and he's an opposition leader. So let me conclude, which is that the U.S. policy on Syria, regime change, is not wrong in its details. It is wrong in its fundamentals. It is wrong root and branch. It violates the UN Charter. It violates international law. The U.S. is bombing parts of Syria without the consent of a legitimate government. That violates international law. The sanctions violate international law. I won't dwell on it because Marilyn and Donna have already discussed that. I think out of our trip flow certain tasks. I think it is the task of the U.S. anti-war movement to unite around a different vision than what it has united around thus far. Thus far, it has united around a feeble vision that is partly false, that partly accepts the dominant State Department corporate media narrative. We must directly and forthrightly challenge U.S. policy if we are to shift U.S. public opinion. Some organizations, alas, buy into the dominant mainstream media narrative. They have not covered themselves in glory by so doing. This is a dangerous moment. Without mentioning names, one of the leading, apparently the leading candidate for president is surrounded by military advisors who are talking about no-fly zones, which means air war against the Syrian Air Force and the Russians, or boots on the ground, which means U.S. invasion. If we're not frightened by that talk, we should be frightened by that talk. This is a dangerous moment. We have to change the basic U.S. policy. We need to have a different kind of anti-war movement, and we must begin to shift U.S. public opinion. Thank you.
So you asked, okay, so we saw 5 days, 6 days of Syria. How do we know the truth? We only know what we saw, and what we saw goes against everything that we read in the United States. What we do right now, here today, is urge you to stop listening to the people that the U.S. government brings out from the Muslim Brotherhood and from ISIS and all the other terrorist organizations. Stop listening to them and go to Syria. The president of Syria said, bring delegations. See for yourself. That's the answer. What we saw is what we're reporting. If you don't have to trust us, but at least accept that there's another picture. Now I take your in terms of meeting with President Assad, we did not ask about barrel bombing. Barrel bombing is a term that the United States uses, like Scud missiles, a nasty word. What we learned from him and from others is that when the terrorists destroy something, they show pictures and say it's the Assad government.
So you're saying barrel bombs do not exist, or this is an invention of the U.S. government?
I'm going to ask for this man. That's the term the U.S. government uses.
What do you call them?
Well, they're bombs.
They're
Why
bombs.
do we call them barrel bombs?
Barrels, because they're in barrels, or they're tanks.
No, they're not. Go
Okay,
ahead.
what are they?
His family can't come out, but he has said that the aid is not getting through. And Vanessa Beeley has said that the aid is not getting through. And one of the reasons for that is that it's being intercepted either by the outside mercenary groups, or at times we have heard stories that the United Nations aid is not getting through either because it's going to the wrong side, to the outside mercenary forces, not to people in the civilians in Syria who deserve and need to have that aid.